What we have here is a group of Americans who do not actually fundamentally believe in the constitutional values of the United States. And they are on a mission to overthrow the constitutional order of the United States in order to secure a reality where, in fact, the Confederacy has won the Civil War and where Nazi Germany won World War II and where, Russia won the Cold War.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to This Time Tomorrow. This is the podcast where we get democracy defenders together and we talk about how we can win against autocracy. My name is Daniela, and I have with me today Benni.
Hi, everybody.
Where are you tuning in from, Benni, today?
I'm tuning in from my home in Munich today. Nothing special.
Awesome. And I'm from Cologne, not too far away. And Omri?
And I'm, as usual, in Brussels.
Awesome. We got the trifecta.
And it's great to have you introduce us. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we have a few interesting stories we're bringing you today. So first, we're going to start in Eastern Europe, where there were Bulgarian protests. Basically, they toppled their government. So we have a positive story of democracy we're starting with some people power, how they did it and why. We'll talk a bit about that. And then we'll have a nice transatlantic thing going here that we've been having for the last few episodes. We're going to cover the leaked version of the national security strategy in the US. We talked about that in the previous episodes in depth. That was communicated last week, but yeah, it gets worse, especially if you're from Austria, Hungary, Italy, or Poland. You're going to want to hear this. And then last but not least, we'll also cover the ever-decreasing rule of law in Israel and how the work of democracy defenders is getting more and more difficult there. So, Omri, you'll walk us through that, what's been happening there, and check out the other episodes, too, if you want to get the full story.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of stuff going on. I'm looking forward to this one. And maybe, Daniela, given that you are by far the most knowledgeable of our little trio here when it comes to everything Bulgaria, maybe you can lead us in and let us know what's actually been happening. I think it's a highly relevant story. I also think that, at least in Germany, everything sort of east of Germany, actually, to be perfectly honest, is significantly underreported. So this might be something that people have seen a headline about, but I'm not sure the full details of what's been going on have been transmitted properly. So yeah, what's going on in Bulgaria?
Yeah, I think it's not getting enough attention that it deserves. So basically, the background story is that Bulgaria, a lot of people don't know this either, but on the 1st of January, they're going to enter the Eurozone. We'll have a new country that's going to be using the euro. And basically, to prepare for that, the government published a 2026 budget plan, which ended up being very controversial. So for the past 2 weeks, people have been out in the streets protesting against the proposed tax hikes, higher social security contributions, and increased state spending. And the increased state spending plan was really seen as like really opaque, kind of shady business. People were saying it feels like a cover for more corruption in the country, which the country's already suffering from one of the highest levels of corruption in the EU. And then also as context, like Bulgarians really have some of the lowest trust in their politicians in Europe. So there's been for years already a lot of frustration about corruption and slow accountability of politicians. So these protests started with this in mind at the start of the month in cities across the country. It was really driven by young people, Gen Z, because the story about the shady budget plan pretty much like also went viral on TikTok, on Bulgarian Talk. But yeah, then the protest became like a really broad civic movement. I mean, in Sofia, in the capital alone, like 100,000 people showed up at its peak. And so the big headline from this week, because this has been the last 2 weeks of people coming out in the streets, is that the government firstly withdrew the budget plan, and then the government fell. So the Prime Minister, Rosen Zelyaskov, and Bulgarians are going to have to correct me if I said that wrong. I might have butchered that. But he announced basically his resignation this week on the 11th of December, and that was just minutes before there was planned to be a no confidence vote. It was due in Parliament against the government, and this was just also days after the biggest mobilizations. Congrats to Bulgarian citizens who mobilized and toppled the government. I mean, we're looking with a little bit envy from Serbia, but now what this means is basically there will be early elections next year, as they also prepare to adopt the euro on the 1st of January. So a little bit of like Bulgarian transition moment right now. But Bulgaria is also used to regular elections at this point. This is actually the 8th round of elections since 2021. So there is a level of like political instability to begin with in Bulgaria. But this is seen as from the civic mobilization as a huge win.
All right, and the guys that got toppled here, how do we see them? I mean, very clearly they were sort of not so far to the side that they would have delayed or even stopped the adoption of the euro. So in some respects, I suppose, they're still on side to a certain extent. On the other hand, the levels of corruption are obviously abhorrent. So a bit of a complicated relationship, I suppose, to EU institutions and to sort of, in the general geopolitical picture, also not entirely a black and white situation. Also because, some of the inflation that the country had to contest with is probably a direct result of, getting the euro introduced. This is something you would expect, at least temporarily, to be a problem, and in this case, maybe it had a role to play in toppling the government, which is a nice side effect. But how do we see that relationship, and what else do we know about these people that were now driven out of power by this massive these massive protests?
Yeah, the Prime Minister is from the GERB party. It's the EPP in Bulgaria. But I mean, the way I also see it, like the entire political spectrum has kind of shifted a bit towards the right anyway in Bulgaria. So their center right is like quite like on the edges of the right of the EPP. Let's put it that way. He is like wildly unpopular. So he has like an approval rating of like 25 to 35%. I saw the different figures. So I think it also wasn't a surprise that there was going to be protest. Also the new proposed budget. I mean, also these like austerity measures, of course, hugely unpopular, and I don't think he campaigned on that, definitely. But there is a level of like intransparency and just also in general like corruption, transparency issues in Bulgaria. I think, I mean, in the end, it's a positive story. Of course, now it's a question of what happens next, and if all the opposition parties are mobilizing right now as they're preparing for snap elections in a couple of weeks. But at least the Bulgarian friends in my life, they see this as a huge win, and they also wanted to make it really clear it's not against the adoption of the euro. So there are maybe still pockets of that mobilization movement who are against adopting the euro in general, and there probably could have been a better education campaign about, this is not going to raise our prices and so on. Like, we're prepared to take this. The economy's prepared to take this. With limiting like consequences that that could shock our economy. But so that's not what the protests were about. Like my friends also wanted to make that really clear to me, is we belong in Europe. We're happy to join now the Eurozone. It was really about this budget plan.
Yeah, I think also we should be aware, as the political spectrum, of course, is slightly different in different countries, and then in post-Soviet space, then it's shifted like according to the history there. The GERB has been a conservative populist type political party that's been mired in a lot of corruption scandals over time. So people who are especially sort of let's say the urban cosmopolitan types would be, relatively angry at them for their history of corruption and populism. They are called, interestingly, as Citizens for European Development of Bulgaria. And I have to say that maybe you would need to be a Bulgarian speaker or slightly more embedded in the country to really know the backstory of how this perspective fits in with national sort of populism. But indeed, I think a change of government would be a very good thing for Europe in general, like just in terms of like levels of corruption and populism that we want to generally decrease across the political spectrum. But then also there is this sort of long-standing legacy of the EU headquarters in Brussels making budget demands on different countries, and that's a relatively damaging dynamic. So while definitely, we need to have good governance within the Eurozone, it's also very good that these protesters are saying, we're not against the Eurozone, we're just against corruption. So I think there's an important political narrative to play out here whereby, reform should not immediately mean something like austerity. We need to get away from that sort of old dynamic and kind of make sure that sort of pro-European does also mean pro-democracy and sort of prosperity in a way, so there is a narrative game to be played here, I think, as well.
Yeah, and this has been the trend also across the Balkans. I mean, we talked in depth about the Serbian protests and how they're also, they're anti-government, yes, but they're also mainly like anti-corruption. This round of protests, like under the banner "corruption kills." So this is like a kind of ongoing theme right now in Eastern Europe. Actually, a symbol of these protests in Bulgaria, and I just love Balkan humor. But I didn't get this at first, but when I was looking at photos and images of the protests, and maybe you've also seen this, there were pictures of pigs everywhere, and there was like people wearing pig masks and just so many pigs. And then I learned that this is Bulgarian political slang, that the word pigs in Bulgarian is an insult for like corrupt, greedy officials. So there was like just pictures of politicians with pig noses or pig snouts. Pictures of like pigs in suits. And at first, I didn't fully get it why there were like cartoon pigs everywhere. But so this is like a kind of like Bulgarian political slang.
Yeah, and I really like it always when people go out on the streets for European reasons. That's always a good thing geopolitically around this region. So yeah, maybe Daniela, Benny, do you want to skedoodle over to the next topic? What do we have next?
Let's make our way over the Atlantic Ocean to the U.S. Right, there was news that came out there, the leaked document. If you think it's over with the national security strategy, you were wrong. There's more. It gets worse.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call it news. Yeah. It's pretty much more of the same. But what has happened is that there was a leak of a previous version of the national security strategy that has been cited in media. Of course, the Americans immediately said, there's one version, that's the one that the president signed, and none of this actually matters. And it's not that directionally this is super different. However, I think it increases the level of clarity when you look at American intentions. So if you are a European leader and you read sort of the officially published version of the national security strategy, you were already kind of freaking out. But you could be forgiven for thinking, essentially Europe is no longer a priority. We can no longer expect the Americans to really support us. And yes, they do have some sympathies for, the more authoritarian forces active within the EU. Now, what this additional version, this previous version, I'm pretty sure it was probably written by somebody like Stephen Miller, and then they cut out the most
The
terrible
most offensive
bits. Exactly. What this makes clear is that no, Europe is not something they don't care about anymore. They care about it very much. In fact, it is a principal adversary. It is a philosophical adversary. It is a geopolitical adversary. And concretely, what is proposed is to rebuild essentially international alliances where this withdrawal from NATO is further solidified. Then they propose to build a new group of the so-called C5, and they would consist of the United States, China, Russia, India, and Japan. So notably, no European participation in what they would then
What about the special relationship with the UK? What happened there?
No.
Painful.
No room
ouch,
for the
ouch.
Brits. No. The Brits are reduced to sort of a kind of
Mid-Atlantic vessel,
aircraft carrier that's just off the coast of Europe. But yeah, essentially something like the G7, but it doesn't include any European power, and definitely not the EU in any way. Then it has this idea of make Europe great again. So essentially, Europe, and we already saw that in the previous thing that was released, is this decaying place that is, culturally in a malaise and needs to be rescued. But specifically, the way to solve it is to destroy the European Union. And Austria, Hungary, Italy, and Poland are 3 member states that are named explicitly that should be pried out of the clutches of Brussels, essentially, and the Americans should work closer with these individual countries. I'm guessing they're thinking that
to topple their regimes or something.
Well, it's to support sort of the far right people within these countries, I suppose, and then trigger their exit from the EU. And I think what's becoming super clear here are 2 things. The Americans are pursuing essentially a strategy that looks like a hub and spoke model in global relations. They want to be at the center of this, and they want to have individual relationships with a lot of different places, and not the kind of networked security that you had with all of these international organizations that the Americans essentially started up post-World War II. And the European Union is an impediment to that. It is something that is too big, potentially too powerful. We never recognize this as Europeans, but the power potential of the EU is quite significant if we did get our shit together. And there's now an active plan underway, partially published, to make this happen, and that's quite concerning.
Yeah. Could I offer maybe a slightly different view of the strategy? So I don't think this is the Americans, quote unquote, as we know them, offering a plan where they are at the center, because what they already had post-war was exactly a global architecture, a liberal democratic global architecture where the US were at the center. What we have here is a group of Americans who do not actually fundamentally believe in the constitutional values of the United States, and they are on a mission to overthrow the constitutional order of the United States in order to secure a reality where, in fact, the Confederacy has won the Civil War, and where Nazi Germany won World War II, and where Russia won the Cold War. They are basically rewriting history in reverse to create a world where there is racial supremacy and where there is autocracy, and where autocrats and strongmen run the world at the expense of everybody else. And the things that count are a healthy nation, racial purity, and defending against this sort of imaginary cultural erasure, as they say. So they're restoring the greatness of Russia. They're restoring the greatness of China after its, many, colonial humiliations at the hands of the West. They're restoring the glory of the American South. And, us kind of liberal Europeans that have a view of an institutional world based on rules and sort of everyone being nice to each other and being slightly too woke, is just a thing of the past. So, I mean, this is a total surrender of American power as it was conceived to this autocratic structure, which is essentially how China and Russia want to run the world, and how Nazi Germany would have run the world if they had won the war.
I think the Nazis would always have kept going to war until
until it was over. Yeah, exactly. They would not have stopped. Yeah.
I mean, just briefly, I think it's kind of difficult to throw China in there because the Chinese are still very much a boogeyman in sort of this American worldview, and I think they still also kind of see themselves as remaining in the center. And I agree there is some cognitive dissonance here where they're tearing down everything that previously granted them this international stature, so sort of what we always refer to as a rules-based order, precisely because they want to get the whole rules-based bit out, and that will prove tricky, I suppose. But they want to engage, I think, in a series of relationships with a lot of different partners where all of the other partners remain uncoordinated. They're not all under the umbrella of the same rule sets, but they have a clear relationship underneath the United States. So a sort of master and serf type relationship where the U.S. is top dog, and then everybody else essentially do their bidding, and the relationship is only relevant in that it serves what they would call the interests of the United States, which is indeed sort of the interests of a small elite within the U.S. that have captured the state. But yeah, I don't know, Daniela, you're
as the resident American, please.
Yeah, no, I mean, I
into
agree.
The land of the free and brave. So
yeah, no, I mean, I agree with the sentiment. I think, it's a rejection of everything that has made America great and leading superpower. So it's and it's based in racism and white supremacy. So yeah, I mean, I disagree with everything you said, but I think also looking from Europe. Now I want to know, how are European leaders going to be reacting to this? And at least to the leaked document, I haven't seen any reactions. I mean, definitely to the published scary, but yeah, again, weak. I mean, other than we dragged a little bit Kaja Kallas last time, but Antonio Costa, I guess, he had some stronger words to say. I think still that Europe. I mean, paraphrasing, Europe needs to do a lot more. And yeah, definitely there's a shifting, I think, global order. But then von der Leyen yesterday, 2 days ago, was just on camera saying the U.S. is our biggest allies, and that she's always had a great relationship with the president of the U.S. So I think even with EU leaders, there's we're not getting on the same page. We're still having infighting. How do we deal with the Americans? Well, let's hold off. Let's see. I know that there's still there's faith that there could be a turnaround. And I mean, I say this too, don't fully give up. I mean, we need to get smart in Europe, but still, we see some shifts, there's some rejection of MAGA. I mean, now, there's been 250 some special elections and key elections since last year, and some 220 Democrats have won. It's 90%. So I think we're on set for a shift, a change in midterms, and then potentially president. But that still can't change I think Europe's approach and path to this, because look how easily things can also turn around. But yeah, so I'm also looking from the European perspective. What do we do to we got to protect ourselves? what do we do now? And like closing our eyes and pretending like nothing's happening is obviously not the approach. Yet that's what the president of the European Commission seems to be doing.
Yeah. And it's because, again, I think we've talked about it at different times on this podcast, is they haven't really understood how to talk to Trump. Trump wants to talk to strong people. He wants to talk to winners. If Ursula von der Leyen tells him, fuck you, Donald, and like, come over here and I'm going to slap you around, then he might actually treat her nicely, because he just likes strength. He likes winners. He likes, she needs to like ride around in a tank and then tell him like, this is my tank, not your tank. And then he's going to love it, but they just don't get that sort of power communications, because they're not sure where their power comes from. Each one of them feels fragmented and unsure of where their political power base actually is. And if we as campaigners were to let them know that no, actually your seat, your job depends on you showing some strength right now, then maybe they would change their tune. I don't know.
And then, there's always this conflation also of sort of structural things and specific Trumpy things. So just sitting down with the Americans and saying, all right, we get it. You can't do this anymore, right? You're not going to underpin the global order. It's not happening. You're just relatively too small now. And we understand, that Europe needs to step up and carry a large part of this burden. That's one conversation, and that should have been had, a long time ago. But, fair enough. We get it. You're out of here. We need to take care of ourselves. Let's sort of make it a transition of a couple of years, and then we have the eastern border and the Mediterranean essentially covered, and it's going to be fine. And then there's the other aspect to this, where you have a foreign power very openly saying, we are going to make Europe great again, as in we are going to actively support the people who want to undermine, the structures of the EU and the constitutional order, because we don't believe in that shit, and democracy is for losers. And that, you also just, in words, you need to very openly reject, much more forcefully. And you need to make sure that, sure, you can try that, but there will be consequences. And there's nothing that says, if you get involved in the Hungarian elections, we can't get involved in the, Texan elections. We're going to, we have some cash lying around, and why not? This is if you open up the relationship like this, then good luck to you. And that kind of confidence just seems to be in very short supply, and it's not entirely clear who would be the person who would step up like this.
Yeah, who would have thought that the Democracy Shield was actually against U.S. foreign interference in our elections?
Absolutely. No, I think, the Democracy Shield definitely it does need to consider what the U.S. is going to do in terms of interference, because they're clearly very, just absolutely vocally saying that they will interfere, and it's a top priority for them to interfere. And I think one last thing about this, and maybe then we can skip forward. But I think when we talk about American strategy and what Trump is thinking, what MAGA is, what they're aiming at, there is just a very heavy cognitive dissonance here, because they're saying America first, American power, American this, but actually what they're doing is just American suicide. And those two things don't sit together in a logical way, because they're lying about half of the equation. And a lot of it just doesn't quite add up the way they think it does. So there is a degree of dissonance here, where I think European observers just need to really take it at face value and not try and figure out some overwhelming strategic logic that isn't there, or try and figure out which bit is the dominant bit that makes more sense. It's just accept that there are contradictory parts of this, and it's part of the same picture.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I agree. Let's move on. Although it keeps sort of ruminating in my head what
Yes.
to do about Trump. I'm sometimes thinking if we can't just bribe the man or something.
But maybe
I'm sure he would appreciate. I don't know. I don't think anyone in Europe has that disposable cash that they're willing to spend. But if only the Qataris
I think
could
100
pitch one
million
in for us,
No, you just gotta be
Switzerland would probably do it.
Yeah, I think you have to be. Look at the shift in energy when he met Zoran Mamdani, who was like campaigning. I mean, in his Mamdani's acceptance speech when he won the mayoral race in New York, told Trump turn the volume up, and then Trump was like, "Oh, I'm listening," and then invited him to the White House, and then now I mean. It seems like that tension has cooled down, even though there's still it sounds like ICE raids are going to New York. But at least it wasn't the tension because he responded to Mamdani's strength that he put out there. I think we can take we in Europe we can really learn from that.
Maybe send Greta in and see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah.
But
sounds like a plan.
Where do we go next?
Exactly.
We're not sending Greta to Israel, but I think the bribery thing was also intended as a nice segue to the
Speaking
Israeli,
of which,
speaking of bribery, what's going on in Israel, Omri?
Yeah, so Israel is, as usual, in this massive maelstrom of just Netanyahu-related hellfire, essentially, a lot of which doesn't get reported in the international press because it's sort of domestic stuff, but it is really textbook democracy collapse and state capture. And there are always these additional steps where, we can kind of zoom out and see how these things sort of can apply and the same methods can apply in different spaces. So maybe it's interesting to just take a look and compare notes. There are two major events that took place in the last maybe month or so that really have rocked the country. One of which is to do with an IDF, so Israeli military investigation into torture that took place of Palestinian detainees in a prison camp in the south of Israel. There's a detainee that was very severely abused by a group of so-called interrogators. These people were then basically interrogated by military police because they broke Israeli law by doing this. Military police came into this military base, and this spread out on social media in real time. So what happened was that the people that were the torturers, the prison abusers, allegedly rounded on the military police, locked them up, beat them up, and then brought in a lot of these sort of MAGA-style extremist settlers as a sort of a mob that surrounded this military base, broke in, beat up some senior officers, once again beat up the military police that was involved there, as was reported. I mean, I can be fact-checked on the specifics here. But then the IDF Attorney General, who's in the top kind of law enforcement officer within the Israeli military. She is a major general running the IDF legal services. She was investigating this as a crime, of course, because it is. Then she was massively attacked by the settler lobby and the Netanyahu machine. That were running a lot of conspiracy theories about her and the IDF. In the meantime, none of these people that broke into this military base and beat up senior officers, etc., like there was a colonel that was beaten up and stuff like that. None of these people have been arrested. None of these people have been investigated. The people who are alleged to have done this torturing have not been arrested or investigated, but this attorney general then decided to leak a video of the torture to show that this actually happened. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. And then she made this mistake allegedly of lying about it to the Supreme Court because there was sort of a Supreme Court petition. And then what happened next was that she was arrested by the Israeli police and put in solitary confinement for allegedly leaking this video, right? And compare this to Netanyahu, who is constantly in his own person, and all of his media advisors are continuously leaking everything to the press that they want to. And there is a specific code name of senior state figure has said this and this, and this is a code name for Netanyahu has said. It's kind of a code name that journalists use, and it gets made fun of, and it's everyone knows that this is Netanyahu himself speaking as if he is someone else. So Netanyahu's office is leaking left, right, and center. They've been paid by Qatar. They've, there's some serious treason allegations there. They're not really. A few of his people are under investigation, have been arrested, but not much is happening there. It's being stalled. Meanwhile, this woman was arrested. She tried to kill herself. There was a bunch of really crazy dark shit happening there. Very unclear details. And I think the main lesson for me in all of this was basically that, you bend over and bend over and bend over to the system. This woman did not, unfortunately, investigate a lot of other war crimes that happened within the Israeli military, within the Israeli system. She did not. I mean, she did a very hard job, and she was in a tough position, and she did some things right, but she didn't go the whole hog in terms of really putting her foot down on a lot of this stuff. And you get aligned to the regime, and you kind of dance the dance a little bit until the machine turns on you, and then you find yourself in solitary confinement. And this is a major general in the army who just goes from, trying to kill herself to being in prison to whatever. And just the level of toxicity that she faced was incredible. And then, the country is reeling from this insanity, trying to process what this means. You fast forward a little bit, and then Netanyahu just decides to, ask for a pardon for himself, which happened, what was it, 2 weeks ago? He just basically sends the president, ceremonial president of Israel, a letter, who's a bit of a plant pot, kind of not very functional human at this point in his life, unfortunately, and basically says, I think you should drop my trial. I think it's in the national interest if my trial is dropped. And, according to Israeli law, if you ask for a pardon, you need to say, first of all, you usually should have been convicted already, so it's post-trial that you ask for a pardon, but you need to be able to say, I committed a crime, I regret it, please pardon me. Netanyahu said nothing of the sort. He did not even mention the word pardon in there. He did not say that he did anything wrong. He just said it's in the national interest for me to not have a trial. And then the president, in response, said, well, I'll look into it. And everyone lost their shit, basically, in the entire country. And then it came out after some investigative journalism that when Herzog was elected president by the parliament with Netanyahu's blessing, even though they are political arch rivals previously, that there was a secret deal apparently between them about this pardon being on the cards. So this is sort of a next level of state capture that is just, completely freaking the country out. And in response, the Israeli opposition, they're always sort of on the back foot, responding. They're always responding to the last crazy thing that happened, so Netanyahu is just driving the news cycle and they're chasing after it. But civil society and the protest movements are really getting ready for an election, and they've mobilized, this entire kind of pre-election operation. Exactly what the Democrats, I think, are not doing in the US, really looking at election integrity. They've mobilized 20,000 volunteers in a relatively small country. and the numbers are growing in order to do kind of election integrity, voter turnout, that kind of stuff. So there is a high level of freak out, more so even if you can imagine than before, even though the levels of freak outs are very high. And yeah, we'll see. And there are various ways in which Netanyahu could blow up the elections, disrupt kind of polling stations, try and reduce the amount of the turnout rate among the Israeli Arab population, citizens that should go out to vote, but maybe would we be dissuaded from it. So there is a lot of this going on, and it's basically a microcosm of how a lot of autocracy playbooks are being played in other countries, essentially.
Yeah, I think every time I hear you guys talk about the situation in Israel, I always think, why don't I hear about this in European media? Like, no one's covering this like in media here. It's so hard to get any of that, like that criticism. I mean, so is it expected that Netanyahu is going to get the pardon? And then when are elections? Are they already scheduled, or they're just now preparing for elections at some soon future date?
So legally, there have to be elections before October 2026. And usually what happens is when the elections come close in Israeli political practice, the coalition sort of jumps ship some months before. Here they're really trying to hold on for dear life until the very end, I think. But legally speaking, unless they really break the law in some egregious way, there should be elections before October of next year. And in terms of Netanyahu getting the pardon, it would be madness. I mean, I think for Herzog to really say, okay, you hereby have a pardon, it would be completely unprecedented, and the Supreme Court would have to step in and probably strike it down, as they have been striking down various insane things that this government have done. But they've only done that because they have very, very strong popular support. They literally have hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people on the street going like, no, we're against this. So
and strong constitutional position still, right?
Yes, but it's the only constitutional backstop. There is no other backstop. The Supreme Court is the only thing that exists. So I don't know if Herzog will be stupid enough to actually give this pardon. I think Netanyahu just sort of had a card up his sleeve, and he was like, well, I should use this one at some point, like, fuck it. Because he is there are like a variety of investigations that are sort of tickling him, and he is very, very worried about his sort of counter interrogation, in his trial, his cross-examination, basically. Like his trial is like the main thing that he really cares about. And so the fact that cross-examination is coming, that's really stressing him out. And he was like, okay, I'm going to throw another card into the wind here and see what happens, like rattle the kind of the jukebox and see what song plays, and it's low risk for him. I doubt it's going to work out, but it's just another thing to kind of keep the country spinning around his tune,
Yeah, but also, what wasn't one of the points in the peace plan that wasn't in the end? Wasn't it also that new elections would be held in Israel? So I guess that means like that, and that was a U.S. brokered peace plan. So there's like still some pressure from.
I mean, so yeah, the U.S. is basically running operations in Gaza in a way that is totally unprecedented in Israeli history. They basically set up an HQ in the south of Israel where the American army sits, which has never happened in Israeli history, and they are basically running everything that happens in Gaza to make sure that that Netanyahu and the far right don't fuck it up. And this is a massive, breach of Israeli sovereignty that previously no Israeli government would have, allowed, but Netanyahu just doesn't give a shit. And he's run out of political capital, and he doesn't care. But as usual, you see that these like super patriotic, make Israel great again, like super extremists, they're not actually that good for patriotism. They're not actually that good for their own sovereignty. They tend to sell out whenever the fuck they want. So it's like, it's again this kind of this strong cognitive dissonance, as we see with Trump. This Israeli coalition also, there's a massive cognitive dissonance between everything they're saying and everything they're doing. And in some places it overlaps, and in some places it just really doesn't. And you need to understand the details in order to understand, like, oh, okay, like, so they're selling out this bit because of that bit, and they're making a deal here and they're making a deal there. But it's like, it's a very disgusting sort of nebulous sphere, you know. But it does show you that, you know, if people get organized and stand up, it makes a huge fucking difference. You know, that's the bottom line, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it's always this, I think the combination of some people with guts in actual positions of influence, who sort of hold what is left of the rules-based order together, plus, you know, the popular support that comes from the ground up. And I think to a certain extent, we've probably seen that in all three examples that we talked about today. And I guess that most of our audience would be sitting more within, you know, the group of people who can exert pressure from the bottom up. But you know, especially in the European case, you know, you need somebody who picks up that mantle then as well. You need somebody who actually, you know, comes out and says, you know, no, we're going to stand for these rules and for these values, because otherwise, you know, you can have all the popular support that you like. If it doesn't have some kind of, you know, focal point, then you're lost as well. So I guess it's
that's something for next time, you know, next generation of leaders. But I do have to run, guys, so
I do think we're going to
have to. Yes, indeed.
We had a good call to action. Go to protest.
Yes, indeed.
Protest everything.
Good. Yeah. Then have a lovely weekend, guys.
Yeah.
See you guys soon. Ciao, ciao.
Have a good weekend.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.